Hey there, welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 169. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is a little different than usual. So if you watch my show regularly, you know that I generally just review the action figures in my collection. But when I started this channel about 3 years ago, I didn't know if I was going to just do action figures. I kind of wanted to do a weekly show where I would talk about the new action figures I get, talk about the movies I watched, talk about the new comic books I purchased, kind of do a general kind of nerdy show. But I found that more people were watching the videos where I was just reviewing figures than just kind of generally talking about whatever. So, back then I even had little title cards that I'd created to divide up the different segments. So I had one where I talked about movies.
Flick Chat.
And I had one where I talked about comic books.
Comic Bookin'.
But I kind of phased those out pretty early on into this process, and I've just been focusing on the action figures. Anyway, I still do collect comic books every single week. I go out and buy a new stack of comic books from my local comic shop, Strange Adventures, here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And, I buy so many that I end up with a big stack on my nightstand beside my bed. And I do keep one kind of like white comic book box next to my nightstand. So as I read them, I file the new stuff in there. And then when that box gets full, I have to take those comic books downstairs and file them away, which is a big pain in the ass because I have dozens of white comic book boxes stacked on top of one another. And I have to pull everything out to file everything away. So I was doing that yesterday, pulling out all my comics. And I thought, since I'm getting out all this stuff, maybe I'll do a video where I kind of show off my comic book collection. And I naively thought that maybe I could show you guys my whole comic book collection in one episode. But the way I alphabetize my comic books is I have all my Marvel comic books alphabetized, all my DC comic books alphabetized, and then everything else I kind of just file under independent, and I have those all alphabetized. So I started going through my independent comics, and I shot about an hour's worth of footage, and I was like, okay, well, that's plenty. I'm going to have to do this over a couple episodes if I even decide to do this. So I'm going to put this one out. This is me showing you my entire independent, anything that's not Marvel or DC comic book collection. If people seem to watch this and find it interesting, then yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll do the rest of my collection. So please let me know below if you think this is interesting, something that you want to see more of, maybe something in more detail, because I kind of just flew through everything pretty quick. I didn't show you any interiors or anything. I was just kind of showing you covers. So now I should mention there is one comic that's non-Marvel, non-DC that I forgot to include in here, which is G.I. Joe. I have a pretty good run of G.I. Joe comics from Devil's Due and from IDW that I actually have separated in boxes labeled G.I. Joe that I kind of took out of my my independent collection, and I kind of forgot about those. So you won't see any G.I. Joe comic books in here, but I do have some. So if I continue with these videos, I might have to do them on their own. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Like I said, let me know at the bottom in the comments, and let's get to it. So first up, I have a couple of Archie books. I'm not really an Archie fan, but this particular one I bought because this was a special cover that was commissioned by a local comic shop here in town, and you can see that Archie and his friends are going to HalCon, which is the name of the comic book convention held here in my hometown of Halifax, and you've got Halifax's kind of skyline drawn in the background. So that's why I decided to pick this one up. On the flip side of that, I've got the first issue of the all-new Archie that came out a couple years ago. It was a pretty good series. It was written by Mark Waid with art by Fiona Staples, and I bought it for about 12 issues, but ultimately kind of gave it up as it just really wasn't my thing. And after a while, I actually got rid of all of the issues except for issue 1. I decided to hold on to it. Next up, I've got the entire 25-issue series of The Astounding Wolfman, which was a fun comic book created by Robert Kirkman, creator of Walking Dead and The Invincible. And this was a superhero comic book that was set inside the same universe as Invincible. And at one point, the Wolfman and Invincible actually had some crossovers. And yeah, this was a really fun series. It was a shame that it only lasted the 25 issues. There you can see, so this isn't actually an issue of Wolfman. You see I go from Wolfman issue 10 here, and the next one I have listed in my collection is Invincible 57. Now, I actually never bought Invincible comics monthly. I collected Invincible in trade paperback format, But since this was a 2-part crossover, you see part 1 of 2, I actually bought the issue of Invincible off the shelf so that I could have part 2 of Wolfman. And the reason why I do that sometimes is that when you buy something monthly, you're getting the story as it's published. But if you're collecting a story in trade paperback, it can take, half a year or longer sometimes before you get to read the story. So I didn't want to read part 2 and have to wait forever to part 1. And there's always a possibility with crossovers like this that maybe this issue wouldn't be included in the Invincible crossover. So I really didn't want to miss out on it. So that's why I kind of got on board with that right off the bat. Anyway, I'm not going to flick through every single one of these covers, but you get the idea. I've got a few random issues of the Atomics, which is a spin-off of Madman. So this is, and there's Madman featured on the cover here. So this is a series created, both written and drawn by Mike Allred. So you can see here, I have a couple of issues of the Atomics, and then kind of lumped in with these, I think I kind of have a spin-off here at the end. So this is a kind of a one-shot of It Girl, who is a character from the Atomics. Then I've got the 3-issue miniseries called Barbaric. This just came out last year in 2021. It was a lot of fun. It was only 3 issues. I think a second series is coming soon, but highly recommended. This is another miniseries. It was just 4 issues. It came out again just last year in 2021. I picked it up primarily because of the artist, Nick Bradshaw. Not only is he an amazing artist, but he's actually a local guy. He lives fairly close to me, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, I did enjoy the art on the series, but overall the story didn't grab me, and so if they publish a second miniseries, I don't think I'll bother picking it up. Here's the first issue of Dynamite's Betty Page comic book that launched just a couple of years ago. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of most of Dynamite's stuff, but I'm a fan of Betty Page, so I thought I'd give this a try. But the problem with this book, as I find with most of Dynamite's books, is they get some really good artists for the covers, but then the interior art doesn't live up to the covers. So yeah, I picked up the first issue just kind of as a collectible, but I never bothered to pick up any more of them. This here was a mini-series published in 2004 called Bite Club, and it had these gorgeous covers by Frank Quietly. That was the main draw of this book, and it was kind of fun. It was about vampires that are kind of like gangsters, so I guess kind of imagine Twilight crossed over with The Sopranos. After the initial series, then we got a second series called Vampire Crime Unit. I picked that one up as well. Both of these were pretty good, and I would recommend the series if you can find it laying around. But yeah, I don't think they've done any more since these 2 initial series. Here's a random issue of Bloodstrike Brutalists. Now, I try not to have random issues in my collection. If I do have one-offs, it's usually a number 1 or something like that. But you see this here, this is the only issue I have of this book, and it's issue 23. And the whole reason I picked it up is for this fun variant cover. You can see it's drawn by Rob Liefeld, who, even though, he's kind of terrible, he's kind of great at the same time. I've been a fan since I was a kid. And one of the common jokes about Rob Liefeld's art is how he covers all of his heroes in all these useless pouches. So he came up with this character, the Pouch, which, he's just made of pouches. Even his giant gun is made of pouches. And so it's really just kind of a joke cover, but I couldn't pass it up. Just too fun. Here's the first issue of Berserker that I picked up last year. I picked this one up because as a little bit of a speculator, I thought this new comic created by Keanu Reeves had potential to maybe go up in value. They sold 1 million of these things, so I don't think it ever will be worth anything. But it also allowed me to just kind of sample the first issue, and I did enjoy it, so I will probably collect the series in trade paperback format. I typically don't start a whole lot of new series as monthly. I collect most things as trade paperback. But when I think it might be a good investment, I sometimes pick up an issue 1 like this. I'm a huge fan of The Crow. It's my all-time favorite movie, and I have a lot of Crow comics, including the original series, but most of them I buy as trade paperbacks. This is the only Crow series that I have as single issues. This was The Crow Wild Justice. Here I have the entire 29-issue run of The Curse of the Spawn. So this was the first kind of ongoing comic book that spun out of the original Spawn book. So there were a couple other miniseries early on in the Spawn days, like a series focusing on Angela, a series focusing on the Violator, which were supporting members of Spawn. But in this series, It was an ongoing series, but they were like 2 issues or 4 issue stories featuring brand new characters a lot of the time. So it really kind of expanded the Spawn universe. So these first 4 issues focused on this new kind of crazy looking Spawn, and it was pretty cool. And then we got some issues focusing on Sam and Twitch, the cops from the Spawn series. Then we got this new female character, Suture, I think her name was. We get some Angela, Jessica Priest. I can't remember, it's been years since I've read a lot of these. But yeah, so it was kind of cool to get all these issues that focused on characters that maybe didn't get a whole lot of screen time in the main series, and it got to expand on them. Like here's the Freak, Overkill, Sam and Twitch again, and then this was the last issue of the run. Here's kind of a weird random comic in my collection. So this comic was created by an actual classmate of Jeffrey Dahmer, and so this tells the story of Durf's interactions with Jeffrey Dahmer in high school. So yeah, kind of weird, kind of creepy, but yeah, anyway. I'm a big fan of J. Scott Campbell's Danger Girl series, and this is a series that I mostly try to collect in trade paperback, but I have picked up a handful of kind of single issues over the years. This one here it's a bound book, so it kind of crosses the line between trade paperback and comic book. You see here, this is just a sketchbook, so it's a lot of pencil drawings by J. Scott Campbell. Here I have a 3D reprinting of the first issue, so that's kind of fun. And then we've got some issues from the original series. And then we go into all the various mini-series that followed. So this here was Hawaiian Punch, Viva Las Vegas. Then we got the Batman Danger Girl crossover. Then we got Back in Black was this series. That was, I think, a 4-issue run there. Then we got Kamikaze. So this was like a storyline set in Japan. And Body Shots. And I think that's it for Danger Girl. Now the next comic I have here is something called Saint Angel. And this was pretty short-lived. And you might notice I've been trying to go through these things in alphabetical order, so this shouldn't really come right after Danger Girl. The reason why it is where it is because I lumped all these books together based on kind of the main book, my favorite book. So these are all done. They're written and drawn, created by this guy named Carl Altstetter, I think. And so you see he had this book, Saint Angel. So I've got, I think, all the issues of Saint Angel here. So there's like 4 of those. And then you see this other book, Cat's Eye. So we've got a few issues of that. And then we get to this one here, Deity. So this is the first comic by Carl Altstetter that I found. And I really enjoyed this book, partly because it actually reminded me a lot of a zine, like a little independent comic book I had been doing for a couple of years at the same time. I had a character that looked a little bit like this. Her name was Amy, and she could travel to alternate dimensions. This comic came out, and this character's name was Jamie, and she could travel to alternate dimensions. So it was kind of eerie, the similarities between this comic and the one that I had created on my own. So I really did enjoy this book. I know it looks like just a TNA book, but I really enjoyed it. He's an amazing artist, and I thought he was a pretty good writer too. And yeah, so I lumped these all together under Deity, and none of them finished up. The story kind of went undone, and I don't know what happened to this guy. I don't know if he's ever done anything else in the industry. I've never seen anything else by him, so yeah, too bad, because it was pretty good stuff. This here is the 10-issue Edward Scissorhands comic published by IDW a few years back. And this was pretty cool because it was written by, I'm reluctant to say she's a friend, she's an acquaintance. So Kate Leth wrote this series, and she actually worked as a clerk at the comic book shop where I've been shopping since the 90s at Strange Adventures. So yeah, when I bought this issue off the rack, she actually was working in the store, and I got her to sign it. So yeah, I've got the whole run here of Edward Scissorhands by Kate Leth. This is another pretty recent book called Exorcisters, And so you see I have issue 1 and issue 2. Those are the only 2 issues I bought. I wasn't necessarily super impressed with it. I decided to give it a chance. But the reason I haven't got rid of it is because it seems like the type of series that could be ripe to turn into a TV show or a movie or something someday. So I would have hate to get rid of this issue only for it to go up in value. So like a lot of issue 1s, I just hold on to them just in case. Here's issue 1 of a comic book called Eve Stranger from IDW. This came out, I think, in 2020. Where you see there, it's dated April 2019. So yeah, it's a pretty recent book. And this is one of those ones where it really grabbed my attention on the rack. I really like the style of art. So I picked up the first issue, really enjoyed it, but rather than buy the rest of the series, I bought the trade paperback when it came out. However, even though I have the full story in trade format, I'm going to hold on to number 1 just as a collectible. This is the 5-issue miniseries Fight Girls by Frank Cho. Came out in 2021. And, you know, let's be honest, the real draw of this book is Frank Cho's art. Like, he can draw beautiful women. And he can also draw awesome monsters. And so he's got a lot of dinosaurs and other creatures and stuff in this book. But even though the storyline was very simple, it was a bunch of women competing for the crown of an empire here. It was very kind of Hunger Games, pretty straightforward competition comic. But despite the beautiful art, I still had a lot of fun reading it too. So you can probably still find this around, and I recommend it. Here's the first issue of Robert Kirkman's Firepower. So again, I picked up the first issue, and this didn't cost me anything because it was released on Free Comic Book Day. I really did enjoy it, but rather than collect the series going forward, I've decided to collect it as trade paperbacks. Here is the first issue of IDW's Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters. So this was the first Godzilla comic that IDW published, and they went on to publish a whole bunch of different mini-series of Godzilla. And so the first series, Kingdom of Monsters, which I think lasted 12 issues, I collected it all monthly. But afterwards, I decided to buy all the series as trade paperbacks. And after a while, it kind of bothered me that I didn't have the first series in trade paperback. So I went and I bought the trade paperback of Kingdom of Monsters, and I got rid of all of the single issues because I didn't need duplicates in my collection. But I kept issue 1 for 1 as a collectible that, you know, if this ever skyrockets in value, which it probably won't, but at least I kept the first issue. But the other thing that was really neat about this cover is retailers could pay to have a special issue prepared for their comic book shop. So all the comic stores that ordered a certain amount of Godzilla issue 1s or whatever would get this special cover. So you can see here, Godzilla is crushing Strange Adventures, which is my comic book store here in Halifax. So that's pretty cool. And I think there was 40 or 50 different versions of this cover available for all the different comic book stores that decided to participate. So, but again, since this one has a local flavor, I'll definitely hold on to it. Speaking of local flavor, the next comic books I have here, I've got them filed under G because they're released by Grandway Comics. And you can see here I have the first issue of Space Cowboy and the Triumphanteers, as well as the first issue of The Street Fighting Man, and the first issue of Grand Adventure. Now these comic books are all really kind of fun throwback retro comics. They might look like they're pretty old, but they're really only just a few years old. And they're published by a guy here in Halifax. They're created here in Halifax. So yeah, a fun little book. I don't know how easy it would be for you to find them, you know, if you're somewhere like elsewhere in Canada or another country altogether. But if you can track them down, they're definitely fun stories. So yeah, look up Grandway Comics. Here's the first issue of Geiger. This is a relatively new series. I think it was just 2021, maybe 2020 that this came out. So I got the first issue written by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. Those guys are both superstars. I'm a fan of them both. So I thought this potential, you know, had a lot of potential. This book had a lot of potential to really take off. But after reading the first issue, I didn't necessarily love it enough to come back to collect the trade paperback. But I am going to hold on to this first issue because who knows where this book could go. Here I have the first issue of The Goon, published by Dark Horse Comics. I never really got into this book. It seems like I should. It's kind of along the same vein of Hellboy a little bit. But anyway, I picked up this first issue, and yeah, it's pretty cool. This is a crossover series that came out last year. It features Gru, who's kind of a goofy cartoon character, paired up with the classic Tarzan. So I'm a casual Tarzan fan, I guess. I read some of his comic books when they come out, but I've never read a Gru comic book, and I've kind of regretted that. When he was in his heyday in the 80s, my cousin, who's actually the guy that got me into collecting comic books, he was really into Gru. So I don't know why I never bothered to check it out. But when I saw that this crossover book was coming out last year, I decided to pick it up. And it was fun. It was 4 issues here. And it was really neat the way they blended the cartoonish art with the kind of more photoreal art. But all in all, I found Gru was kind of a one-note joke. And I couldn't really imagine collecting a whole series of his. So yeah, I don't think I'll be going back for any more Gru series anytime soon. Next up, I've got my Hellboy comic books. Now, Hellboy is probably my favorite comic book series of all time. However, by the time I discovered it, it had already been around for a few years, and there was already, I think, 3 or 4 collections available. So I started buying it in the trade paperback format, and honestly, this is maybe the series that really won me over in collecting in trade paperback format, and I've kind of never really looked back. So the only thing that I still have here in my Hellboy collection are things that I don't think have been collected yet. So sometimes as these series end up in a trade paperback, I get rid of them. So this one here is called The Corpse. I think this might have been a free comic book day thing, or it was 25 cents. The story The Corpse has definitely been collected, but I think there's some other things in the back here that haven't been. Here is a 20th anniversary sampler, which has got some odds and ends from Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy. Here's a free comic book day Baltimore, which is a spin-off of Hellboy. Here's something related to the Hellboy live-action movie. Then I've got the whole series Weird Tales, which I don't know why I decided to collect this monthly rather than buy the trade paperback, but I did. So I've got all of those. And then a couple other rando things from the Hellboy universe. I've got a Sir Edward Grey comic book here, and the Amazing Screw-On Head. This here is the comic book adaptation of the movie Hobo with a Shotgun. And if you've never seen Hobo with a Shotgun, you really should seek it out. It's a really fun movie, and it was made by some local guys here in my hometown. And they actually won a contest when Quentin Tarantino put out his, what those movies, Death Proof and, whatever. He put out those movies, and there was a bunch of little fake trailers at the start of those movies. And some local guys made a trailer for a fake movie called Hobo with a Shotgun that played at the start of those Grindhouse movies in theaters. And then the guys that made the trailer actually went on to make a full-length movie shot in my town of Halifax. It starred actors that I knew. Pretty cool. So the fact that there's a comic book adaptation, that's pretty sweet. So there you go. A comic book series I'm really enjoying right now is called Something is Killing the Children. And even though it's only been around for maybe 2 to 3 years, hasn't been around very long. I didn't get onto it until I kind of heard all the good buzz, and by that point the first issue had already shot up in value quite a bit. So I've been collecting Something is Killing the Children in trade paperback format. But when they launched the first spin-off comic book called Enter the House of Slaughter, I decided to grab the free comic book day preview, and I grabbed the first issue. It was pretty cool, and I will probably collect this series in trade paperback format. Now, you can judge me if you want to, but this next series is Jem and the Holograms, published by IDW. Now, IDW is kind of known for all their licensed properties. They do G.I. Joe, Transformers, the Ninja Turtles, and they do a really good job at all of them. And with Jem and the Holograms, I grew up watching that cartoon. I didn't have any of the figures, but my younger sisters did, and so I was well versed in the world of Jem. And so when they did this relaunch, I really liked it. The character redesigns by Sophie Campbell were amazing. She's an amazing artist. And this was a really fun series. So I collected the whole run of Jem and the Holograms right up until, I think it ended around issue 25 or so. And then they did another series. So there's 25. And then there was a series on the Misfits. So this was a mini-series on their rival band. So I have the full Misfits series. And then there was a new series called Jem Infinity, or Infinite. And this is where it kind of lost me. So after Infinite, I stopped buying Jem comic books. But I'm not sure if they can continue to publish them. I think the series might have ended here, or maybe it went a little while longer. But I don't believe there's currently a Jem series. So maybe I have the whole thing. When the all-new Archie comic book came out a couple of years ago, that was followed up by an all-new Jughead and an all-new Betty and Veronica and an all-new Josie and the Pussycats. And who doesn't love Josie and the Pussycats? I love that live-action movie. I don't care what you say. So I'm going to hold on to this one. Here's another series you may choose to judge me on because it's kind of a cheesecake TNA book, but it's called Jungle Girl. It's by Frank Cho, who we talked about earlier, and it's just got great artwork and fun stories. I don't know what to tell you. In the same way that I enjoy Tarzan, I enjoy Jungle Girl stories, whether they're Jungle Girl herself or Sheena the She-Devil or Sheena, any of these jungle type women. I always get a kick out of these series. So you can see here I've got season 1 and then season 2 of Jungle Girl, and then we go right into season 3. So yeah, fun stuff, great artwork. Next up, I've got the full series of Kaiju Max, which is written and drawn by Xander Cannon. And this is a really fun book. Like, it looks cartoony, so you might think it's a children's book, but it's really not. It's about kaiju, like Godzilla, and they're all in a Supermax prison. So there's a lot of, like, prison-y stuff going on. Everything from people getting shanked, people getting, like, raped in the shower, or whatever. Like, there's a lot of cursing, even though it's kind of cleverly hidden with kind of funny kaiju slang, swearing. But he's done these in 6-issue seasons. So this is the first 5 seasons that you're seeing here, and he's currently publishing the 6th and final season, which I'm currently collecting. I think there's only 1 issue left to come out at this point in time. But yeah, don't let the artwork fool you. This is not a childish comic book. It's a lot of fun, and yeah, they cover a lot of ground. Every season kind of focuses on a different set of characters, and yeah, I highly recommend you check this out. This 4-issue series is called The Last Paper Route, and it's a fun comic book, but the only reason that I really would have thought to pick this up is because it's written by some friends of mine and drawn by friends of mine. If you're familiar with the rapper The Word Burglar, he's Sean Jordan, and he's the co-creator of The Last Paper Route, formerly known as Adventures in Paper Routing. It's a really fun comic book. They used to do this as a little black and white zine and kind of sell it around town. But now this time around, with help from my friend Dave Howlett as well, you see I've got these guys to sign it for me. So yeah, they put out this 4-issue miniseries in a very official comic book looking format. It's a lot of fun. So if you can find it, check out The Last Paper Route and check out The Word Burglar's rapping as well. Here's a random issue. You'll see this is issue 5 of a comic book called Local. I'll be honest, I don't know much about the premise of this book, but I think in each issue the character traveled to a different location, and the writer and artist would kind of like really try and make the comic feel true to that area. It was either well researched or maybe it was a place they'd visited. Again, I don't know the exact premise of this, but this is from many years ago, and I remember I picked this up because this was set in Halifax, Nova Scotia, my town. You see here the Oxford Theatre, which was kind of a landmark here in Halifax, although it is no longer there. But anyway, so that's why I've picked this up, and that's why I've held on to it. One of the few series published by Dynamite Comics that I've actually stuck with for quite a while was their Lone Ranger comic book. I've always been a fan of the idea of the Lone Ranger and his sidekick Tonto. So when this comic came out, I don't know how many years back now, 15 years ago maybe, I was really excited to see the return of the Lone Ranger because he kind of had been forgotten. He hadn't been in pop culture for quite some time. They've since made a pretty bad movie. But anyway, I really enjoyed these Lone Ranger comic books. I think they did suffer again from having really amazing covers by John Cassidy, but then the interior art didn't quite live up to the covers. But it was still a fun series to collect. Now here I've got the first 6 issues of Kong of Skull Island from Boom Studios, and this comic came out around the same time that the movie Skull Island came out. And I remember when these comics were being published, I had every intention of buying the trade paperback, and then I think I kind of just forgot about it, or maybe they never even put it out as a collection. But anyway, you'll see there it says 1 of 6. My comic shop, Strange Adventures, they sometimes will take comics and they'll bundle them up and they'll sell them for a good deal. So even though this had come out a couple of years ago, it was just last year they had bundled these things up and they said, all 6 issues of Kong Skull Island for like $10 or something. So I was like, yeah, I'll definitely grab that since I never got the trade paperback. Although to my frustration, I think this comic had sold well enough at the time that they extended it past the first 6 issues. So if memory serves, I got to the end of issue 6 and it said, pick up issue 7. So I think this comic went for 2 or 3 issues beyond issue 6, and now it drives me nuts that I don't have them. But anyway, it was a pretty fun comic. So earlier I showed you some Atomics comics, which were a spin-off from Mad Men. Well, here are my actual Mad Men comic books. So this is another comic character that I prefer to collect in trade paperbacks because I kind of discovered him kind of late in the game. Although he did have a new series that launched kind of after I had discovered him, and I decided to collect that monthly, although it was pretty short-lived. So I think I have the whole run of that particular Madman series. And yeah, great work. Mike Allred has gone on to do some stuff for Marvel and stuff, and I just really enjoy all of his stuff. So not only do I recommend Mad Men, but he's currently doing a book called The Excellence for Marvel. So check that out too. This is a 3-issue miniseries called The Memory Collectors, and you can see it's very dark, gothic, and the artwork kind of caught my attention. The artwork inside by the creator Menton 3, I think is the name he goes by. Anyway, it's really beautiful, kind of like digitally painted artwork and stuff, but I remember the storyline being kind of confusing, and I wouldn't even dare to try and explain it to you at this point in time. Back in the 80s, I remember there being all kinds of these biography comic books about rock bands like AC/DC and Kiss and Alice Cooper and all these kind of older rock bands that I wasn't really into. But my older brother, he would buy a lot of them because he liked those metal bands. So I didn't know that they continued to make these comic books into the 90s and stuff about some of the bands that I actually liked. So when I saw this NoFX comic book, I had to pick it up. The Phantom is another character I prefer to collect in trade paperback format, but a couple of years ago I randomly picked up this new issue 1 from Moonstone. A few years ago I found this comic book called Punks on the shelf at my local comic book shop, and I was like, what is this? And it was the weirdest friggin' comic book. It was made with all this kind of like digital art, kind of collage style, and it starred these characters, a guy with a fist for a head, a guy with a dog for a head, and an Abraham Lincoln. It is very weird, and I would have continued to buy it, but my comic shop never got any more issues in beyond the first 3. I don't know how many they made, but yeah, it was a weird, fun comic book. And then beyond, I only have these 3 issues, and then here I have the first issue of a totally unrelated comic book called Punk Mambo, and I think I just stuck it in here on the back of this issue of Punks to save myself a bag and a board. Here's another recent issue 1, Radiant Black. I just kind of decided to pick this up. For one, it looked promising, so I thought if I like the first issue, I'll collect it in trade paperbacks. And it also had some hype when it was coming out, so I thought this might be a good good book to pick up, just in case it ever like spikes in value. I liked it well enough, but I never did bother to go pick up the trade paperback. Here are some Robotech comic books by, I think it was Wildstorm is the publisher. And I was a big fan of the Robotech cartoon when I was a kid. And I would really like to see somebody take that story and really kind of continue with it. But nothing has really grabbed me. Like, there have been some new cartoons and there have been some new comic books, but nothing really has worked for me since the original. Here you'll see was a 5-issue miniseries, I think, with Robotech crossed over with Voltron, which was kind of fun, but at the same time did not leave a major impression on me. Most recently, there was a new Robotech comic book, which I think is still being published. I only picked up the first issue here, and the reason why I haven't bothered to continue this is because this comic book, I believe, is just a retelling of the original cartoon series. So I've already seen this story. But this cover here, this is another one of those kind of like local incentive covers. I think if you ordered a certain amount, you could get a custom cover. So here you see a battle with the Zentradi happening again in Nova Scotia. We've got the lighthouse there. I believe this is supposed to be taking place at Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia. So I've got quite a few of these little local Nova Scotia covers here, which is kind of neat. The Rocketeer is another character that I prefer to collect in trade paperback format, and I have quite a few Rocketeer paperbacks. However, I have this here movie adaptation, which I don't think has ever been collected, so I have that as a single issue. And then when it comes to these series, I liked the cover so much that I bought the single issues, and I still went and bought the collected edition afterwards. So these issues here had painted covers by Alex Ross, but they also had these pencil sketch versions. So I got all the pencil sketch variants, and I just think they're beautiful. Love these covers. And then another series that was put out by IDW that followed this one had these amazing variant covers, and these are by a local artist named James White from here in Halifax. So again, here's another kind of local Halifax connection, and he did these just beautiful covers. And I actually like these things so much, I bought an art print of this cover, or of this cover here, and I got it framed, and you can actually see it right over there in the corner. So IDW was already publishing their G.I. Joe and Transformer comic books when they decided to launch a shared Hasbro universe. And so they launched a couple of new titles to tie into those existing books. So I picked up the first issue of Micronauts as well as the first issue of ROM. Overall, I think that Hasbro verse was kind of a fail. But anyway, I picked up these first issues anyway. When Image Comics first launched in 1992, one of the launch flagship titles was The Savage Dragon by Eric Larson. So this here is the first issue of that, which I picked up off the newsstand back in the day. I also have issue 2, which was a crossover with the Turtles, and issue 3, which was, I believe, the end of the initial miniseries before it went on to an ongoing series, which I picked up issue 1 and 2, but I actually stopped buying it there. I really do enjoy these pulp era heroes like the Phantom or like the Rocketeer. So when Dynamite launched their new Shadow comic book, I picked up the first issue, but I remember being not super impressed with it, so I never picked up anymore. Another one of those 1992 Image launch titles was Jim Valentino's Shadowhawk, and it had this really cool kind of foil cover on the first issue. So I ended up with issue 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I think that's where I ended that one. Now, I told you before that I like Jungle Girls, so of course I was going to collect Sheena's new comic book when Devil's Due started publishing this miniseries. So I believe this initial series was 6 issues, and then there was another series, Sheena Dark Rising. So I think I have that whole run as well. And then we've got Sheena Queen of the Jungle. This is a new number 1 for another series, which I have, again, I think that whole run. And then this was a kind of a one-shot, I believe. And then a new number 1 to another series. This is another kind of random number 1 issue in my collection. This came out just recently. It was published by Archie Comics. They got the rights to this old character, The Shield, and Rob Liefeld put out the first issue, and it was garbage in that Rob Liefeld sort of way, but at the same time, it's got that Rob Liefeld charm. This is the one and only Simpsons comic book I have in my collection, and it's kind of an oddity. The only reason I have this is probably about 14 years ago, I went to Europe, and I traveled around for 16 days, and I went to 7 different countries, I think, and I wanted to get some sort of nerdy souvenir from every place I went. Not just, a t-shirt or a mug, but I wanted to buy some sort of toy or collectible that would remind me of that place. And when I was in Germany, I just couldn't find anything, and I think I found this in a grocery store or something. So this is actually a German, if you look at the pricing and stuff there, this is a German version of a Simpsons comic book. So I would have much preferred to find a German Spider-Man comic book, but this was all they had, so that's what I've got. Now, this is kind of a weird comic book that I don't know much about, and maybe I should research it a little bit more. But you see, this comic book is called Siren, and it starred this kind of cool female character, and it was published by Malibu, I believe. But you see here, she's fighting Diamondback, who's a Marvel character, and there's Taskmaster in the background. So this was a comic book that was kind of published by its own publisher, Malibu, but it had ties to Marvel. I think maybe Marvel had bought Malibu or something like that. I don't remember. So I have the 0 issue of Siren, and you see here she's fighting some new version of War Machine, so another Marvel tie-in issue. And then here's issue 3, and I think it ended there. I don't know if it continued and I just didn't get the issues, or if it just ended abruptly, but I don't think this was a natural ending to the series. So yeah, I don't know what the deal was with that weird little crossover between Malibu and Marvel, but I did like that character of Siren, so it's too bad that she's doesn't exist anymore. Here's the first issue of the series Snot Girl that came out a couple of years ago. It wasn't really for me. I kind of picked this up again as a speculator because it's created by Brian Lee O'Malley, the same guy that created Scott Pilgrim, and that became kind of a hit. And it's also cool. I've played poker with Brian Lee O'Malley. He lived in Halifax for a couple of years. So anything that has that kind of local connection, I like to pick it up. Here's an issue of Solid Blood by Robert Kirkman. This just came out, I want to say last year. It's pretty recent. And this was kind of a weird little gimmick, I'll say. I won't get into it now, but you see here, this is issue 17, but it's actually the only issue of Solid Blood that exists. And they put out this whole weird little marketing campaign about this comic book that it was from a long-lost series or whatever. So I don't know if they ever intend to pick this up and continue it, but it was kind of a neat little oddity anyway. So here we get into my Spawn stuff. So first up, you'll see I've got some like mini-series and stuff. This was a one-shot Spawn versus Batman crossover by Frank Miller. This is another Spawn and Batman crossover by a different creative team. Then we've got this 4-issue miniseries called Blood Feud, which introduced like vampires into the Spawn universe. Then we've got these issues are Spawn. These are reprints of the first issue that came with an action figure Spawn Kickstarter last year. This here is a reprint of Spawn number 1. I think this came with the original Spawn toy I bought back in 1994. And here is a medieval Spawn Witchblade. This was a mini series that I think was probably a few issues, but I only bought the first issue. Here's a couple other Spawn spin-offs where I only bought the first issue. I wasn't really feeling Spawn at the time when these books were coming out. I was buying it almost as an obligation. So when they would put out these spin-offs, I would sometimes buy the first issue to sample them. So this is the first issue of Spawn the Dark Ages. Here's the first issue of Hellspawn, but I never went on to buy any future issues of these series. But now here we are with the main Spawn series. So I was super excited when this book launched back in 1992. Todd Mcfarlane, I loved his artwork. You know, he came on to Hulk and Spider-Man and a few other things at Marvel, and he just kind of like blew me away. So when him and the other guys went to launch Image, Spawn was the title I was most looking forward to, and I definitely think it was the best of the bunch. And it's really, along with Savage Dragon, it's the only one that has continued on all these years. So you can see I was buying Spawn. These are my issues that I bought right off of the, I don't want to say newsstand, but right from the comic book shop back in the day. And this predates me going to Strange Adventures. I didn't start going to Strange Adventures until high school when my childhood comic book shop, the Cardboard Jungle, closed down. So most of these early issues of Spawn were purchased from the Cardboard Jungle. So you can see here I have got a lot of Spawn. I bought it month after month after month, and you won't find any gaps in my collection. However, I'm not going to sit here and make you watch me flick through nearly 300 Spawn comic books. So why don't we just kind of jump to the chase, and we'll get to the part where I stopped collecting it. Okay, so I just jumped ahead about 200 issues. And for a time, Al Simmons, the main Spawn, had been killed off and he wasn't in the book anymore. There was a new Spawn, Jim Downing. And you see here, issue 249 says that Al Simmons returns next issue. So there we go. We got the landmark 250th issue. And then there was a one-shot that I just tucked in here because this is where it belongs as far as continuity goes. Spawn Resurrection, which tells how Al Simmons came back to being Spawn. And yeah, so I just kept on going. So I hadn't missed a single month of Spawn comic books since 1992. And I was going right up, and this was probably about 2016 or 17, where this was the last issue of Spawn I bought, issue 266. And right around the same time, I also bought this one-shot called Spawn Kills. And not only was I feeling a little turned off by the book, because the comic book itself had gotten really kind of silly, but this Spawn Kills one-shot was the kind of the nail in the coffin for me. I'd been thinking about dropping Spawn for a long time, but I just didn't want to do it because I'd been collecting it so long. But I thought this was just so dumb, and I felt like I'd just thrown money away on this stupid thing, that I was like, that's it, I'm done collecting Spawn. So I stopped reading Spawn for a while. But a short time later, like, I do follow up on like comic book websites and things like that, and I heard good things were happening in Spawn again. So Even though my last issue was just 266, it wasn't that long later when I decided, oh, maybe I'll pick up these new issues since I'm hearing good things. So I picked up 274 and 275 off of the shelf at my local comic book shop, but I was not impressed by these, and I was like, nope, not good enough for me to come back just yet. But as we were getting close to the release of Spawn 300, again, I started hearing good things, so I thought maybe I'll check this out and I'll buy issue 300. So I started picking it up again at 296, and I've been on board with Spawn again ever since. So now it kind of drives me crazy that I have that about a 30 or 25 issue gap in my collection. But anyway, I've been collecting Spawn now. Here's the 300th issue. Here's the 301st issue. You see here they tout it as a record breaking because the longest running independent comic book previously only went 300 issues, and that was the comic book Cerebus. So by hitting 301, Spawn is now the longest running independent comic book. And yeah, and it's going strong. Not only am I collecting this Spawn book, but I'm collecting the 3 spin-off books, King Spawn and Gunslinger Spawn and the Scorched, that have spun out of this. So it's a good time to be into Spawn. I just picked up this book called Stake about a month ago from Strange Adventures. I was just kind of looking around. It was a soft week for me, so I was looking for something to buy, and they had 3 issues of this book, Stake. So I assumed it was a brand new book and that this was all there was at this point. So I grabbed the first 3 issues and I thought if I like it, I'll continue to buy it. I learned later, though, that this book had come out a while ago, and the later 3 issues, Strange Adventures either never got them or they sold out of them. And I didn't like this book enough to bother to really seek it out. So now it's kind of annoying that I've got 3 of the 6 issues of this miniseries. So I don't know. I might hold on to them for a while, but then I'll probably get rid of them. This was kind of a fun series by Chris Bachalo, published by Cliffhanger. So this was Steampunk. So that was kind of a 0 issue. And yeah, then I've got the whole run here. Now, I enjoyed this, but at the same time, it was kind of a confusing book. Not only is the story kind of confusing, but the artwork can be a little bit confusing too. He's a very detailed artist, and there's a lot going on in his artwork. So yeah, a decent series. Worth seeking out if you've never read it. Now, when it comes to independent comic books, one of my very first loves, right around the same time that Image was forming, was Tank Girl. I had read an article in a magazine somewhere about them making a live-action movie based on a comic book, Tank Girl, and they showed an image of the character. I had never heard of this book, but it immediately looked like something I wanted to check out, and I sought it out. And I've got a bunch of random Tank Girl comic books over the years. So here's some from the original Dark Horse series. Here's some from one of the later series, The Odyssey. But you see, these are 4-issue series, and I've just got 2 and 2. Here's some random Free Comic Book Day issue. Another series, The Apocalypse. So I have lots of different Tank Girl, but I also have a lot of them in trade paperback. This is another one of those characters that I prefer to collect in that format. But I actually am such a Tank Girl fan that for many years I was buying the single issues like this, and then I was also buying the same stories as trade paperback when they would come out months later. So I think that's one of very few comic books that I've ever done that with. But you can see I've got quite a few here. So lots more Tank Girls, lots of different artists on the book. You know, my favorite is probably still the original artist, Jamie Hewlett, who's now more famous for his work on the Gorillas. But this guy here has been the artist on the book for the last several years. I think his name is, it's escaping me, I want to say Alan Parsons? Yeah. Anyway, Parsons is great. Beautiful artwork here. So, yeah, good stuff with all this Tank Girl. I've got a handful of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic books. I do currently collect the IDW series, but I collect it in trade paperback. But when these guys first came out, Archie Comics was publishing the new version of them. They were originally published by Mirage, but I didn't know about them then because they were kind of small and independent. But Archie picked up the license and kind of made the comic books of the lighter, more cartoon-friendly versions of the Turtles. So I picked up those first 2 issues, and then I've got this one random issue of Ninja Turtle Adventures. I think the only reason I kept this one is because it's got Ray Fillet, who's a favorite character of mine. And then here's one from IDW's latest series as well. I honestly don't know if anybody's publishing Tomb Raider comic books right now. I don't see why they shouldn't. It's a good property for comic books. But I think this was the first ever comic book series published by Top Cow. And I really enjoyed this book. I think this is everything I wanted the Tomb Raider movies to be, but they just didn't deliver. There was a lot of good adventure, very Indiana Jones-esque in these adventures. I remember the artwork being good, not just on the covers, but on the interiors. And yeah, they were good, engaging storylines. So I collected this series right up till issue 25. And I can't remember if it continued on beyond that. If it did, I don't think it lasted a whole lot longer past the 25th issue. But yeah, that was a good series. I've always been a fan of Transformers comic books. I have the entire Marvel run from the 80s in trade paperback collections. And ever since IDW took over the license like a dozen years ago, I collect all of their stuff in trade paperback format as well. But I still have quite a few single issues of Transformers in my collection. So this here is a convention exclusive comic put out by Fun Publications. This here is a crossover between Transformers and Mars Attacks. So usually for things like this that I don't think will be collected anywhere, I would buy that. Here is the first issue of Regeneration 1. And the reason I picked up this one, even though I bought Regeneration 1 as a trade paperback, is because this is another one of those Halifax exclusive covers. So this clock that you see in the background, that is our famous city clock. It's on Citadel Hill. And you can see that they wrote HalCons. Again, HalCon is the convention that we have here in Halifax. So I had to pick up this issue because it's got some local flavor. And this one was done, I think, the following year. This is the bridge that's in Halifax, and it connects us to our sister city, Dartmouth. So it might not be immediately recognizable as Halifax's bridge to somebody who's never been to Halifax, but I definitely see it. Here's another incentive cover. So similar to the Godzilla one where he was stomping on a comic book shop, this is one where you've got Devastator smashing a comic book shop, and you can see he's smashing the store Giant Robot Comics. So that is another local comic shop, another really great store that I shop at frequently, and they're the ones that got all of these Transformer books. And I think, yeah, here's one more. This is, again, Superion hanging over Giant Robot Comics. So lots of cool covers with some local connection. Then we've got Transformers Deviations, Transformers 84, a couple specials there. This is like a little encyclopedia on Transformers. So yeah, this is just some random stuff. Now here we get into some comics published by Dreamwave. So I don't think that company's around any longer. They're the ones that were publishing Transformers comic books for the first time since the 80s when they picked up the license in the early 2000s. And I really liked what Dreamwave was doing. So I'm not sure exactly what happened with them, but they kind of abruptly lost the license to IDW, and all their storylines kind of just disappeared. But they did some really great stuff with the license. After a number of miniseries, Dreamwave finally put out an ongoing Transformers comic book. So this is where the storyline really got going. Again, some great stories in here. Even though I was really pleased with IDW stuff, they got off to a slow start. So it took me a while to get over the loss of Dreamwave Universe. But I think in the end, IDW ultimately surpassed what these guys did. So here are some Transformers comics by IDW. I don't necessarily know why I chose to buy these ones monthly, because I was collecting the main series as trade paperback, and now it kind of annoys me to have my collection kind of spread out between monthlies and paperbacks. But when it came to some of these miniseries, such as Megatron Origins, I decided to collect the 4 issues on its own. Here we have an Avengers Transformers crossover, which was, I think, about 5 issues, maybe 4. I've got some of these prequel comics to the live-action Transformers movies. I bought some of those before I'd ever seen the movies. I didn't know they were going to suck so bad, so I might not have bought some of these otherwise. Now here I have a series called Transformers Spotlight that IDW put out, and there were some great comic books. Every issue focused on a different character and gave you some background and kind of helped establish stories that were happening in the main book. So I've got quite a few of these here. Now, I am a fan of Gerard Way, both his music and his comic books, such as The Umbrella Academy. So when he launched this new title here, The True Lives of the Fabulous Killjoys, I decided to pick up this whole miniseries, although to be honest, this one didn't leave a big impression on me. This was a really fun series that came out last year, written and drawn by one of my favorite artists, James Herron. It's called Ultra Mega, so it's got kind of a kaiju, like Ultraman type of vibe to it. But yeah, there was a 4-issue miniseries as well as this preview issue. It was a lot of fun. Now, I just mentioned Gerard Way's Umbrella Academy. So here I have the whole first series and single issues. But after this came out, I decided to buy the collection. And for the later stories that came out, I didn't buy the single issues, just the trade paperbacks. Now here's another Spawn spin-off. This was a 3-issue series written by Alan Moore, I believe, and starring Spawn's archenemy, the Violator. Now, I'm a big fan of The Walking Dead, but unfortunately I got to it a little bit late. I had heard all the buzz, and I think it was probably about the time the 4th trade paperback was out that I decided to pick up the trades, and I immediately fell in love with the series. And I was content to collect it as trade paperbacks, because that's how I prefer to start buying new series. But I wish I had known this was going to be such a hot series, because the first issue of Walking Dead is probably the most valuable recent comic book in the last couple of decades. And there was no way I could have known that, but I wish I had bought some of the other key issues, like the first appearance of Michonne or Negan, but foolishly I did not buy those. Anyway, this is the only single issue of Walking Dead that I have. This came out after the series ended, called Negan Lives, and it was kind of just a follow-up. And this was put out by Robert Kirkman as kind of an incentive to get people back into comic shops after COVID had kind of shut them down. And so the only reason I bought this is because it was unlikely they were going to do another Walking Dead collection if this was the only a one-shot, so I picked that up. But anyway, after this came out, they relaunched Walking Dead from issue 1 again, but in color, because the original series was in black and white. Now, even though I have the entire series in black and white in trade paperback collection, I decided to start buying the series in color. So why? I don't know. I could just take my trade paperbacks and reread those if I wanted to. But this bi-weekly series is coming out now. It's at about issue 30 or so. And I don't know. I'm really enjoying rereading it again in color. And even when I get home with a new stack of comic books, I find Walking Dead Deluxe is one of the first books I read from my stack, even though it's a story I've already read before. So I think that speaks volumes about how good this series was. We 3 was a critically acclaimed series by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely from about 15 years ago now, I think. And it was about 3 little kind of like cyborg animals. So I've got all 3 issues here, and I also have just one Mexican version here as well. And I think I bought this when I was in Mexico. So yeah, just one of those little oddities that I like to pick up sometimes. Going back to the initial launch of Image Comics in '92, I also picked up the first issue of Wildcats. But that was as far as I went on this series. Wild Guard was a really fun series by Todd Mcfarlane. And the premise was that all these kind of wannabe superheroes were trying out to join a reality show super team called Wild Guard. So I feel it's a premise that's been done a few times since, but it was pretty original at the time. And it even gave fans an option to vote in and pick their choices. So there was like a real world element of fan voting involved. So yeah, a really good series, and a couple other multiple spin-offs and one-shots. Again, going back to the launch of Image Comics, here is Rob Liefeld's Youngblood #1, along with the Zero issue. And the last comic I have in my independent comic book collection is Lady Zorro. Now, should this have been filed under L instead of Z? Maybe. But my thought process was that if I do get any other Zorro comics, I'll probably want them all together under Z. So anyway, there you go. Lady Zorro. So that is my independent comic book collection. I hope you enjoyed that little tour. Hope that wasn't too boring. But yeah, if you did enjoy it, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Usually I'm talking about toys, but if I find that the comic book video maybe draws some more attention, maybe I'll focus more on doing some comic books. So yeah, let me know in the comments, please. Anyway, whether you're back for a toy video or a comic book video, I will see you soon. So yeah, have a good one. Ciao.